Hello, my name is Georgia. Welcome to the book club. Let's talk about Zadie Smith's Intimations. It's strange to be reading a book about the early days of the pandemic while we are still in the midst of the global pandemic. I can probably say that about any book that explores life from 2020 until whenever this pandemic ends, but it's hard not to think about how the pandemic has shaped our lives while reading this book. In these 6 essays, Smith explores privilege, community, suffering, why we make art, and more. Of course, we can't escape from the pandemic, especially because it was written during the early days of lockdown. I can't tell if it's because we are somehow in late 2021 and we are still hearing about the world struggling to cope with this not-so-new normal, or if it's because the pandemic is just something that's always tucked in some corner of my mind. But you can clearly see how the pandemic set the tone for Intimations. It even begins with something that calls back to the start of everything last year. The fact that she was leaving New York, that there was an unprecedented April that arrives that changes everything. The first essay talks about looking at peonies with 2 other women, all of them strangers, and about womanhood, but also about how they had no clue that their lives were about to be changed by something outside of their control. For Smith, writing is her way of control, and it juxtaposes against the situation that they are about to be thrown in. It's still my favorite essay in the book, even though it's been months since the first time I've heard it read by Smith herself during a panel in last year's Singapore Writers' Festival. I got a peek into the different things that Smith was ruminating on, about what it means to be a writer or an artist in a time where your job seems to be unimportant, or about types of suffering. Is there a difference between your artistic suffering and real suffering? Or do we make light of our personal sufferings, the kind that only seems to be designed to destroy you and only you? The essays are not specifically written about the pandemic itself, but kind of around issues that she thought of while in the midst of it. She does take us out of it sometimes, calling out to specific times before the virus. There's one specific mini-essay called A Man with Strong Hands, under the larger Screen Grabs essay that talks about the masseuse Ben, whom she goes to for chair massages. Ben doesn't know her name, but they talk about the weather and public school days off, and refer to their respective children, his boy or her boy. A school closure means different things to both of them. For her, it might be an inconvenience. For him, it's a genuine emergency. This stands out to me because in the previous essay, Suffering Like Mel Gibson, she wrote, "Class is a bubble, formed by privilege, shaping and manipulating your conception of reality." Suffering is not like that. Suffering is not relative, it's absolute. Suffering has an absolute relation to the suffering individual. It cannot be easily mediated by a third term, like privilege. Yet in A Man with Strong Hands, Ben suffers differently from Smith just because of their class difference. It's somewhat ironic that she compares his suffering to hers immediately after pointing out that suffering can't be compared. Maybe it's to point out that there's a tendency for all of us to not do as we say because we still feel a certain way. Or maybe I'm reading it all wrong and I have completely misinterpreted the essays. But I can't deny that we are all suffering in one way or another. And maybe we are comparing our suffering and confusing it with certain privileges we're afforded. We don't want to suffer for no reason, especially if others are suffering seemingly more than we are, and have what we think are good reasons for their suffering. To wrap up the essays, she ends with a list of 26 steps and lessons she had picked up from various parts of her life. From her mother, from people she knows, and people she's read. The essay is titled Intimations, making it the titular essay of the book. According to Oxford Languages, the word intimation means an indication or hint, or the action of making something known, especially in an indirect way. She writes about what these people or things or concepts have made known to her. These are her influences, or the things that has shaped perhaps not only her writing, but also her life. Reading the last essay helped to tie up why I think the book was titled Intimations. It's about what has been made known to her through the early lockdown experience. And what has been made known to us, or at least to me, is that when you're dealing with your own suffering or with a collective suffering, it is so important to have compassion. Have compassion not just for others or for the larger society, but also for yourself. I want to be able to pick up this book years later when it's all over and look at it with fresh new eyes. I wonder what will be made known to me then.